Welcome back for part 2, 25 to 1. My countdown of personal opinion only 50 of my personal favorite games of all time from the 1990s. With that said, if you're curious about 50 to 26, check out part 1. With that said, music today in the background is the main boss theme overall from Final Fantasy VIII. With that said, coming in first at number 25, released on the Sega Genesis, and that is, many people call it a Sega take or a Zelda clone. But it also has elements of Pokemon, though it predates Pokemon in fact. It's a great action-adventure game called Crusader of Century. If you ever get a chance to try out Crusader Century, check it out. It is, I think, one of the most criminally underrated hidden gems that Sega ever did, especially of the 1990s. Coming in at 24, released in 1995 as well. It would be released for the Sega Saturn. It would be one of the launch titles for the Saturn, and still to this day, in my personal opinion, remains arguably one of my personal favorite Saturn games of all time. And that is the OG original Panzer Dragoon. If you've never played the Panzer Dragoon games, check out the remake. It is top tier. Great. The soundtrack is great, the gameplay is fun, I like the creature designs. Coming in at 23, released for the Sega Genesis. It was more or less Sega's answer to Squaresoft's Final Fantasy VII. And it is a top tier, S tier JRPG of the 1990s. Coming at 23 is the superb classic Phantasy Star 4. Anybody that's followed me for a long time knows I'm a big uber Sega fan. I was a Sega fanboy before I really knew what a fanboy was. But Phantasy Star 2 and 4 are both S tier JRPGs, if you ask me, or rather, I should say, turn-based RPGs, which wasn't everyone's cup of tea. Coming in at 22, released in 1997, it would be released on the Saturn and the PS1, however, I personally have only played on the PS1. It is arguably one of the all-time classics from Konami. 22 goes to the superb great Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Coming in at 21, it was released for the Nintendo 64, and it was released in 1995. And that is the all-time classic, The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, which still remains, I would say, most people easily in their top 5 favorite Zeldas of all time. And I'm no exception to that. However, coming in next at number 20 is arguably, in my opinion, simply the best ever of pro wrestling games. And I think it's time to change the music. With that said, coming in at 20, released for the N64, released in 1998, it is the all-time classic WCW NWO Revenge. If you've never played this game, check it out. It is one of the best and most fun wrestling games ever for me, and arguably, in my opinion, the best wrestling game, period, for the 1990s. Speaking as somebody who grew up in the Attitude Era, or rather I guess you could say, the Monday Night Wars, and I was a big uber WCW defender. Big fan of, like, the original classic Black and White, NWO, or the Wolf Pack. Many great memories of that time period from WCW. That would be where I first saw Chris Jericho wrestle, as well as many others. Plus, you can't beat classic Hollywood Hogan. And of course, Goldberg, back in his prime. Coming in at number 19, released for the Super Nintendo, released in 1991, remains arguably to this day my single favorite Mario game of all time. Coming in at 19 is Super Mario World, which, yeah, easily, maybe it's blind nostalgia, I'm not sure, but most likely, but I'm willing to admit it. I have a blindness of nostalgia for Super Mario World. The music, the worlds, the gameplay, it's all great, and one of the best platformers of all time. Coming in at number 18, released for the Sega Genesis, released in 1992. And this is one of the reasons the Genesis was my first console I would ever actually play. Coming in at number 18 goes to Sonic the Hedgehog 2, or Sonic 2 for short. And would also be the introduction of a big, huge fan favorite, Tails. And it was really cool, and I still think remains the best of the 2D era Sonic games. Personal bias though. With that said, number 17, however, released in 1998 for specifically played on the Saturn, though it played on PS1 version, inferior to Saturn. But doesn't change fact. Number 17 goes to Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter, which I personally prefer more than X-Men vs. Street Fighter. Mostly because of the roster, and Cyber Akuma is just awesome. Coming in next at number 16, released in 1997 for the PS1, it remains my favorite of the Crash series of all time. Coming in at number 16 goes to Crash 2, Cortex Strikes Back. Coming in at number 15, released in 1992 for the Super Nintendo, The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, which was my favorite Zelda game for a great many years, up until the GameCube. With that said, still remains easily in my top 5 favorite Zelda games of all time. Coming in at number 14, released on the PS1, released in 1999. And it remains the best of the franchise and one of the best 3D fighters of all time. At least from this perspective. Coming in at number 14 goes to Bloody Roar 2, The New Breed. Between the awesome normal final boss Gato the Lion and of course the sick, insanely pain as nails fight special stage, and only get one shot per playthrough, as long as you don't lose a single fight up to that point. And of course that is against Shenlong the Tiger. A great combat system, very fluent, very responsive, and a great many, I would say, very definitive fighting characters in the game. And, of course, the annoyance that is Yuriko the Half-Beast in the higher levels, as well as Busuzima the Chameleon. Coming in at number 13, released in 1998 for the Saturn, is arguably, though it would have been released in the West as Darkstalkers 3, I will remember it best as the Japanese original. Vampire Savior comes in 13. Coming in at number 12, released for the PS1, and that goes to a merger of RPG and survival horror. What do you get when you mix Final Fantasy and Resident Evil? You get number 12, Parasite Eve. A hidden gem, in my opinion, at least nowadays. And the game deserves a remaster or a remake. Just don't mess with the combat system. Coming in at number 11, released in 1998 for the Saturn exclusively, it remains a Saturn exclusive to this very day. Coming at number 11, one of, I think, the most unique and awesome RPG experiences of all time, definitely on the Saturn, is the definitive. It is the Final Fantasy VI or Final Fantasy VII of that console. And 11 goes to Panzer Dragoon Saga. Coming in at number 10 is the only Pokemon game on here because I didn't play a huge amount of Pokemon really until the early 2000s. But for me, coming in at number 10 is arguably my favorite of the early Pokemon games. It is Pokemon Yellow Pikachu Edition. More loyal to the actual first season, the Kanto era of Pokemon. But for me, yeah. Pokemon Yellow Pikachu Edition, released in 1999 on the Game Boy Color, still remains one of my favorites to this day. Coming in at number 9, released for the Super Nintendo originally. It was released as Final Fantasy III, but of course we know it better as Final Fantasy VI. And of course, the awesome villain that is Kefka, the Joker of Final Fantasy. Though, if Joker was a demigod with absurd levels of power, which would be actually a very scary thought. But yeah, for me, 9 goes to Final Fantasy VI, as it is arguably the true, I would say, second S-tier Final Fantasy, after maybe also Final Fantasy IV. But for me, still remains my favorite of the 2D era of Final Fantasy to this very day. I still hold Final Fantasy VI over Final Fantasy VII easily. With that said, coming in at number 8, released in 1999 for the Dreamcast. Would be released on PS1, but never played that version of the game. Coming at number 8 goes to the original Marvel vs. Capcom Clash of Superheroes, with the always awesome and edgy McFarlane-influenced design and awesome final boss that is Onslaught, which still remains, I think, the best boss in the franchise. However, coming in at number 7, from one of my personal favorite Capcom franchises of all time. Coming at number 7, released for the Super Nintendo, released in 1994, remains, I think, one of the best action platformers of all time. For me, at 7 goes to Capcom, and goes to the incredible masterpiece that is Mega Man X1. Coming in at number 6 is another RPG masterpiece from the Squaresoft era. Coming in at number 6, released in 1995 for the Super Nintendo, that honor goes to Chrono Trigger, which is one of the greatest games that Squaresoft would ever produce. With that said, time to switch up the music again to one final piece. And I just feel the need to get a little bit harder music now that we're in the finals. Coming in at number 5, released for the Super Nintendo, and still remains one of the best 2D fighting games to this very day. Coming in at number 5 from Capcom, that is Street Fighter II Turbo, which of course would also add additional characters, specifically allow you to play with the boss characters. And then we go on to number 4, released in 1998 for the PS1, and we'd later get ports to other stuff, including the N64. But I still say this is the best version. Coming in at number 4 goes to the original classic Resident Evil 2. Coming in at number 3, released on the PS1 as well as others, but for me, the PS1 version is the personal favorite version. Released in 1996, Street Fighter Alpha 2, which remains my favorite Street Fighter game to this very day. However, coming in at number 2, honor goes to 1999, the Dreamcast, and it was a launch title and still remains, I think, the best 3D fighter of all time. Coming at number 2 is the original Soul Calibur. Coming at number 1, released in 1999 for the PS1. Most people always regard Final Fantasy VII as the best Final Fantasy game of all time. I disagree completely. For me, the best and easily also my favorite game of the 1990s. Coming at number 1, Final Fantasy VIII. Anybody that's watched my channel long enough knows how much I praise and love this game. I'm one of the weirdos that still thinks the Junction system is my personal favorite system of all time. So people can hate on all they want. I'm still going to continue loving Final Fantasy VIII no matter what. And I will die on this hill and say Final Fantasy VIII is better than Final Fantasy VII. Final Fantasy VII, in my opinion, is overrated. And yes, that includes your perspective, Maximilian, dude. I get it. You love it, but I feel the same way about Final Fantasy VIII. For me, this is the game that made me a Final Fantasy fan for life. Was this specific game, though. Some later Final Fantasies would make me question my loyalties to Final Fantasy. Namely, original Final Fantasy 13. But with that said, that is my top 50 favorite video games of the 1990s. So leave a comment below and give me your thoughts. What are your personal favorites? Who was your favorite company of this decade? Easily probably the 4 game companies that would make the most games I would love would be Nintendo, Sega, Squaresoft, and Capcom, of course. With that said, I'll see y'all next time. Same YouTube time, same YouTube channel. And stay safe out there, and happy holidays to everyone. See you soon.